places, would you? Then I'd be.
You want to make it work.
Jackie Barton, you know.
I figured she wouldn't. I imagine she's on TV. She used to be on.
There's 3 seats in the front here if anyone wants to sit down. Oh, 2, excuse me. Why put this one here? Of all the times we hold a meeting at the library, there's usually maybe 20 people at the most. And when I hold it at Freedom Hall, that's when 10 people come or 5 people come. So I said, well, we'll hold it at the library. We'll get maybe tops 40 people. I think we've outdone ourselves. So thank you all for coming. My name's Jessica Grissetti, and I'm the president of the Historical Society. And tonight we've got some special treats. Dr. Gould will read a paper that he's researched on colonial Cotuit, and I'm sure he'll take questions at the end. And then we'll have an oral interview parlay with Dr. Keith Rapp and Mr. Francis Rennie. At the end of that, too, I'm sure everyone will want to ask questions, too. It is being videotaped by Eric Mickelson, and so if you have questions, speak up so it will get onto the videotape, and I hope everyone enjoys themselves. I want to get going because I know it's probably going to be a long night, so. Dr. Gould, thank you.
I'm not going to read all of it. It's 10 pages long and it gets longer all the time. But I'm going to hit the highlights. In front of Freedom Hall, there's a stone, and I'm sure you've all looked at that and maybe wondered, as I have. It says, dedicated to the memory of those men and women who in 1648 first settled this part of Cape Cod. Yet nobody knows the names of those people. I don't even know why they chose the date 1648. And most of the histories only mention a couple of Crocker men, no women. So that's how I got going on this. Much of the history of colonial Cotuit is before the Revolution, that is about 250 years, is the story of the Indians, and that goes back 4,000 years. There was an archaeological dig quite close to Cotuit several years ago on Baxter Neck, which revealed that there was continuous settlement in this area for about 4,000 years. Now for the Indian name Cotuit. The best historians, that is Tracer and Otis, both agree that Cotuit means long fields. So it probably describes those long open fields, probably up towards Santuit direction, excellent farmland, where the Indians grew their corn and mounds fertilized with fish and squash vines and beans between the mounds. But there's another professional theory about the name, and that is Green and Saxby, the names of the land, and their professional historians, they say it comes from the Algonquian word pine woodland. Well, take your pick, but a recent issue of the Wampanoag magazine Mitark, which I got, says Cotuit means place of the council. And Lee Roscoe, who is a good cultural historian, says that Otis points out that coup or cook are root syllables for oyster locations. So, what we need is a good linguist who really can understand all of this. Maybe all of these meanings are correct, but you can take your pick. Now, as far as the white contact with this area, we have probably about 100 years before the Pilgrims ever arrived here, in which white men were probably in contact. And one of the reasons we know this, and in that Baxter Neck study, there are little artifacts that are clearly European. It's not clearly from the colonial period. It's not clear. This is often called by the archaeologists the contact period. So there were white men's tools. Probably the Indians were using iron tools and pots and things like that they had gotten from these people, French, Basques, Spanish fishermen, people like this, who had brought these over long before the Pilgrims arrived. When the Pilgrims arrived, we have a report that there was an Indian village in Cotuit, and probably about where the crossing of Route 28 is the location for that. That would have been the place of the council, if you take the Indian interpretation for it. And that would be a logical place for settlement, because it would be at the place where the road or the Indian trail between Falmouth and Barnstable and Hyannis would have crossed over the river, let's say. Also the head of probably the herring, or a good herring run, and close to good farmland. Now the only thing that's left of that Indian village that I know of, maybe some of you old-timers can tell me of other things, is the Great Trout Mound. Now, we've all seen the Great Trout Mound, because Otis says that even in 1802, that thousands of people had seen the Great Trout Mound. Now, why haven't we seen the Great Trout Mound? The Great Trout Mound hasn't been bulldozed, as far as I know, and according to Otis, it lies behind Steve Agostino's house. That's up in Santuit. Do you know where that is? It's just a couple houses south of Route 28. I have hunted around there. I've talked to Joe Barrett. I've talked to everybody around there, and I can't find that mound. Now, the chief of the Wampanoags tells me that it's really 2 miles farther north, up on just below the pond. Now, I don't know where it is. Maybe some of you have seen that mound, but let me know if you know where the mound is. But I don't think it's been bulldozed. Anyway, the Cotuit Indians were peaceful and friendly with the white settlers from the beginning, and they were among the first ones who were converted to. I'm sorry, I got my back to Francis Rennie. I shouldn't do that. Come over here. And they were among the first that were converted to Christianity, and this became a praying Indian settlement. And from the reports of the early missionaries, we gathered that there were really two areas, one up by the pond, that is the Santuit Pond, and one down where in Santuit itself. And these were part of one tribal group. After the missionaries then, the first people who came over from West Barnstable came over for the farming and for oysters and for the salt hay. And you can think of places like Fuller's Marsh or all along the coast here as being wonderful places to pasture cattle. So people probably brought their cattle over here, kept them here most of the year, and at times mowed the salt hay, but be a long haul over to West Barnstable to get it here. But it's clear that by 1650 people were doing a lot of pasturing of their cattle here. A lot of those early settlers, by the way, in Barnstable were cowboys. That was why they came here. They came for the salt hay. But oyster making was also probably practiced. And taking oysters out of what was called the Oyster River, is what we call today the Cotuit Bay and the Narrows and North Bay, was known as the Oyster River. And the oyster, it was reported that the oysters were as big as a large shoe, and you could probably go out in low tide and just gather as many of these things as you wanted, but then you had to shuck them into a barrel of brine and then salt it down and have it shipped out by a small boat. We know that at least this was done in Hyannis, but that Nicholas Davis, the first person who started making oysters, as I described it, actually had gotten his oysters from this area. We don't know specifically, but around Grand Island, so that we know that Cotuit was probably the source of his oysters. The other thing the oysters provided was huge mounds of shells. So over 4,000 years of eating oysters and clams and so on, the Indians just threw these onto shell middens. These have practically disappeared today for one good reason. Valuable, very valuable commodity for making plaster and for mortar, for chimneys. And nobody ever thought of this until I happened to come across the location of the first lime industry on the Cape. And Marion Villiamer, who's producing a book on the industries of the Cape, recognizes this as one of our first industries. And this was done by Jonathan Hatch. We know that Jonathan Hatch's industry was probably somewhere over in the Osterville area, but it was only a mile away from the chief Papamonuk's Witu. And so that this area was probably used very early for this lime making. You get the cut down the trees and create a very hot fire, and then create the lime that was necessary for the building of the brick chimneys that were the core of all of the Cape Cod houses, and also for plastering and probably for good fertilizer too. We all know about the third purchase, how this whole area was acquired here. I won't go through that again about the brass kettles and so on, and so that's pretty well known. And the fights about the boundary over on the Cotuit River and so on. I'll skip over some of that. Except that what we discover when you look at those records very carefully, you discover that the Indians retained the right to certain lands, including Cotuit Neck. Now, the description of those lands is so vague, as all the land records are, but we know that they had 30 acres up on North Bay somewhere. We don't know precisely where that was. Eventually, all of these land claims, including Cotuit, were bought out by the town, and the ones in Cotuit were, in 1706, the town paid 48 shillings for a good deal on the part of the town. We know the names of some of these colonial Indians from these deeds. It's very interesting that John Webquish is described as having a field somewhere up on North Bay, and I think it's probably as close to Point Isabella as you can imagine, and probably the cow yard. You know, the cow yard probably was a good pasture area in there, and has probably been farmed continuously since Indian times. And John Webquish kept that well up into till 1708. Down at Rope's Landing, what we call Rope's Landing, it should be called Hooper's Landing, I suppose. Depends on how you feel about it. There was a Indian who had a field right down there, maybe up where the Coolidge's property is, whose name was Adequin. Common name over there. We don't know his first name. It was just Mr. Adequin. So well up into the 18th century, the Indians were living and farming right beside the white settlers, right here in Cotuit. And of course, they continue to live here. As we know, the Pell's family still lives here in Cotuit. Pirate visits. I won't go through the Hannah Screechum. You all know the story of Hannah Screechum, except to note that it's based on the actual fact that Captain Kidd did sail from New York to Boston, and may have stopped off and left his treasure somewhere. Why not Cotuit? We'll let that one go. Among the first whites who received land here, and around that date that we see on the stone over there, were Thomas and Peter Blossom, the Bournes, the Joneses, the Halls, the Davises, the Lewises. And notice that there are no Nickersons. The Nickersons didn't come till way afterward. They were nowhere around. All of these names then, and probably it's not clear that these people lived here at all. They were all over West Barnstable or Barnstable, let's say, and owned pieces of land out here, which they may have used for their cattle or for their lime business or gathering oysters or whatever. The one who was probably the first settler was Matthew Jones. He ought to be the person who's we think of first. We don't know anything about Matthew Jones. I don't even know his wife's name. So there you are. Call Matthew Jones the first settler, certainly by 1700 and probably a lot earlier. When the town lands, the common lands, were divided up in Barnstable. This was one of the last areas that was divided up because it was so remote from the settlements on the north side. And there were 19 families that received lands in the Cotuit area. I'll just list them off for you, just so you recognize. Blish, Bursley, Chipman, Crocker, 11 different Crockers, Davis, Fuller, Goodspeed, Gorham, Hinckley, Jones, Lewis, Lothrop, Lowell, Parker, Percival, Finney, Slazy, Smith, and Sturgis. Now you recognize a few of those names. There are some of those names actually persisted through. Like the Crockers are still around, the Lovells were around till very recently, and Goodspeed are familiar. Some of these, and the Sturgises, there are Sturgis descendants still in town. Now, Barnabas Fuller from Fuller's Marsh, you know about that, may have built a house down there, but it isn't clear because although he had a barn in Fuller's Marsh, his house may have been up more near Lovell's Pond. So it isn't entirely clear where these people actually lived, whether any of these people actually lived in this area. Now, if they were here, they were probably fairly close to the water, because remember what their main occupation was: making lime, farming, and we know where the farmlands were generally in the areas where the Indians had farmed in the past, and also making turpentine. Turpentine, we've lost that one, but remember that the pitch pines could be slashed like rubber trees. So you make a big slash on the side, and then they would bleed down into you would take a wooden peg and put it in there, and then hang a bucket below it, and that would provide you turpentine, which was a very important. You could sell that for a naval store. So these were the main occupations then: farming, oyster making, lime making, and turpentine. So what was life like for these people who built the first houses over on this side in Cotuit? And I'm talking around 1700 or so. Most of these people were really self-sufficient. They all, even if they had a subsidiary occupation like making oysters or making lime or something, they were basically farmers. So that they had to raise their own food and subsist pretty much on that. The main crop was corn. Just like the Indians, they probably farmed it like the Indians, but except they began to do it in rows instead of the mounds. It was easier to plant that way, but they did probably fertilize it with the alewives that came up the rivers in the springtime, and then they planted squash and pumpkins and beans in between, as the Indians had before. They supplemented this with English grains like rye, and we have Ryefield Point as a memory of that. Barley Field up near Prince's Cove as a memory of that. Some oats probably, and a few and peas. So these were the main crops then. The fields, however, unlike the Indians, were fertilized by the cattle manure, and all of the farms had at least a horse and a cow. How do we know this, by the way? This is from the inventories of the old estates of the people who lived in this area. So they would then, the cow obviously provided milk for the children, butter for the table, and cheese for the family. The horse pulled the cart, got them to church on Sunday. Everybody had to go over to the West Barnstable Church, that is after the church was built in 1717, and spent the day at that. You couldn't do any cooking, you couldn't do anything else, and everybody in Cotuit was a Congregationalist. There were no Quakers around until the Dottridges came, there were no Baptists, they were all Congregationalists. So this was sort of a community thing. Everybody had it off there, and if you didn't show up at church, everybody showed up at church, you heard about it, and you were penalized by that, and you spent the day at it. But it was fun. It must have been like a big picnic. So you brought your food along, and you saw all your neighbors. This was the big social occasion of the week, and you didn't have to do any work. Thank goodness. The women didn't have to cook, and so this was Sunday was probably the great day. What about schools? No schools. Although Barnstable did start schools very early, that was way, way over in Barnstable. And even the people in Hyannis didn't get over there. Schools were not until after the Revolution. So, how did people learn to read and write? The Bible. Everybody read the Bible the first thing in the morning. Papa got up and he read out of the Bible. So, in a lifetime, you heard the Bible many, many, many times over, and you learned to read from the Bible. It was often the only book in the house. Everybody knew the Bible, and you couldn't help quoting it all the time. You knew the stories from the Bible. You knew all of the quotations and everything like that. That was part of people's life. The Bible was it. Houses. We have a faint idea of what some of these houses look like here. From the remaining houses over on the north side, particularly in Cotuit, and these were solidly built, very plain, no paint at all, just plain shingle or a cedar split, red cedar split in clapboards, but not too much clapboarding. It's easier to do the small shingles. These were really solidly built houses with gunstock posts that and often two stories high around a central chimney. And in that chimney was at the back of the chimney. That is, these all, I should point out that these houses all face south for good ecological reasons. Warmer because the sun shines on the house from the south. And you back up to the cold north wind. So in the central chimney then, at the back of that then was the great big fireplace. And this was centered on what they called the hall. The hall was the kitchen, dining room, where the loom was, where there was probably a bed, where everything went on in the family, and the other rooms were merely sleeping rooms and no closets. You put everything that you didn't need into chests. The toilets, of course, there were no such things as bathrooms. You took a bath in front of the fire occasionally, probably before Sunday, before you took off for church on Sunday and put on your all your good clothes. And then, if you had to go to the toilet, it was out back, out in the barnyard. So a large part of the day would be involved in things like drawing water. What about water? Where did they get the water? We know even today, you can see the springs along the edge of the water here, where the water comes out naturally. And most of these houses were sited next to one of these springs, because you wouldn't want to carry it very far. This was hard work. And as far as we know, wells were not drilled until long after the Revolution. So you used the natural spring for your water. So, what about the surrounding area? The woods. The woods were probably more park-like than they are today, because the Indians had always burned off the underbrush to keep it open for hunting, and this was probably kept this way. You had natural fires, and one of the strange things is that today we really don't realize how bad forest fires can be with the accumulated brush that we have around. And probably the appearance of the woodlands was much more open. But there were wolves out there. There were bounties paid for wolves in Cotuit, often more Cotuit over in this direction than there were in any other part of the town. And you could turn your pigs loose out there. You couldn't do that up in Barnstable because they get into people's gardens and so on. Probably there were pigs turned loose over on Grand Island. Great place to let them go out and get their acorns and the beech mast and so on. And of course, the deer, the rabbits, the wildfowl, the pheasants, the turkeys, and things like that were all things that were used for the family food, as well as the oysters, the fish, and the clams. So that's a rough idea of what the daily life was like. Now let me run down very quickly a little bit of what we know about the colonial families here. The Crocker families was one of the first to get grants here, and it's not surprising that most of the houses that stand today from the earliest colonial period were built by the Crockers. Probably the first one was built somewhere around 1700, up on near the Samson's Folly. It isn't clear where that first house was. And it is this land of Joseph Crocker that has given rise to the legend of the King's Grant. Now, you've all heard of King's Grant. Dear friends, it is pure legend. There is no such thing as the King's Grant. For one thing, in 1700, the king was no longer granting land to anybody. It all belonged to the town of Barnstable, the proprietors of the town of Barnstable. So if Joseph Crocker got his land from the king, he didn't get it in Cotuit. I don't know where the story came from. Somebody made it up. It's a neat story, but there is absolutely no evidence for it. The oldest house in Cotuit, as you probably know, up on the quarter of 28, is the Ebenezer Crocker house, and that was supposedly dragged over from West Barnstable by a team of oxen. 17 oxen it took to drag it over those sandy roads. You can imagine that must have been quite a job. Ebenezer Crocker was an interesting character, and we know more about him than others. He had an interesting habit of giving his children the middle name of the day of the week in which they were born. So there was Zerviah Wednesday, Ebenezer Thursday, Kenelm Sunday, and there were 2 Mondays and 3 Fridays. There were up in Santuit. There are 3 other colonial houses built by the Crocker family. Alvin Friday's house is now the Barrett's Buckle Works, and that has a lot of nice colonial features to it. And just after that period, the Zenas Friday house was built in 1782. That's the Cahoon Museum today. And Alvin Jr.'s house, which is across the street. Just across the river is the house that belonged to Gideon Hawley, the famous missionary to the Indians. And if you ever looked at the boundary of Barnstable, you notice how it jogs out toward Mashpee. Well, that's the 200 acres that the Indians had to give to Gideon Hawley because he wasn't allowed to live on missionary land. And that is that little gore of Cotuit that sticks out toward Mashpee over there, where the gas station and all those stores are, is the Gideon Hawley area. And this brings up the question of whether Gideon Hawley is buried there. We've never found his gravestone, although a gravestone has been found up there. Where were these people buried? You can't find any of these colonial people anywhere in town. My theory is that they were buried out back. You weren't going to take the body all the way over to West Barnstable, which was the nearest churchyard, and I think they're all out back. They didn't have stone carvers probably, or somebody swiped the stones if they did have stone carvers. The first ones that appear are in the Marston's Mills Cemetery, and you can see several of them on the first row. You go down there sometime, you see some of the Crockers who lived in Cotuit. I mentioned the grain that was ground in the grist mill at Sampson's Mill Bridge. The grist mill long gone. We don't know when it was built. It seems we know that Sampson built his mill about 1800. But there may have been a mill there as much as 100 years before that. And nobody's ever done any systematic archaeological digging. I hope nobody does any unsystematic kind in that area. But we might be able to figure out when that mill was actually first built. The oldest house on the still standing on the saltwater is the Reuben Crocker house. And if you go to Old Post Road on the northwest corner, set way back, is the Reuben Crocker house, which probably dates from about 1770. And nearby, there are a couple of old houses. So the Little River, in a way, is the oldest part of Cotuit, the oldest settled part, at least where they're on the water. But there were also colonial houses. We know from the kettle holes on the Thornton's place and on the Lurie's place up on Old Post Road, where I'm naming the current owners. If you don't recognize them, I could give you some intermediate names on those. But these houses along there were known to the villagers here as Old Chalky. And that puzzled me for many years until I connected it with the lime business. Of course, you can't find the chalk there today. They've burned up all the old shell mounds, but I think old Chalky probably takes its name, and there are a whole cluster of houses in that area. The best colonial monuments we have in Cotuit, however, the most prominent feature we have are the cow fences. And these crisscross Cotuit all over. I don't know, there are probably lots that I've never seen. They're sort of fun to follow because they follow the old property lines in the fields. And you know how the cow fences were dug. They're high on one side and low on the other. Most of them are filled in, so you can't see how steep they were and how hard it would have been for a cow to climb up something at least this high, let's say. But what you did, they tell me, was you take a jug of whiskey and you pace off about 100 paces off into the woods, and you tell men to start digging. And they took the sand and just threw it up on one side and kept a straight line till they got the jug of whiskey. Took a swig, and then you take the jug down another 100 yards. That's the story how these cow fences. But if you see some of these cow fences, think of them as colonial remnants, because they probably weren't used after the colonial times. One of the most intriguing one of these is one that forms an enclosure bigger than this room. It couldn't have been a barn. There were no barns that big at all, and I think it might have been a cow pen. Place where you bring the cattle, and down at the lower end there was a little spring, let's say, and you could water the cattle there and bring them in there, at night. Well, I ought to close now with the final story of Cotuit in the colonial period. At the time of the Revolution, one of the most exciting things that happened was almost in Cotuit. It was today probably you'd call it Cotuit because people don't know where the boundary of Cotuit is anyway. All that Cotuit landing and everything like that really isn't. And there's Cotuit Commons, and there are all kinds of other places that are outside of Cotuit. But up on Route 28, at the crest of the hill, before you go down into Marston's Mills, was a tavern. Nymphas Marston had a tavern there at the time of the Revolution. Since Nymphas Marston had been in charge of the deliberations, he was town moderator at the time of the vote on the Declaration of Independence, and Barnstable had voted no. He was a little bit embarrassed, I think, about the outcome of the Revolution. And to prove his patriotism, he invited all the soldiers who were coming back from Falmouth. They were defending against the British bombardment down in Falmouth, and you can see several of the houses down there in Falmouth that were bombed by the British. As they were marching back up the road toward Barnstable, Nymphas invited them in for a drink, and one of the soldiers, with a little too much under his belt, I think, let his musket go off into the ceiling. And until quite recently, one could look at that house, go into the house. He kept it that way just to prove that they were celebrating the Revolution. This was his fireworks anyway. The ceiling in the dining room of the Nymphas Marston's house for a long time had this empty hole in the ceiling. That house has been moved, by the way, away from Marston's Mills, where it really is, over to Grand Island. You can see it when you go up Seapuit. The next time you sail up Seapuit, or I'll point it out the next time you take a Barnstable Harbor tour, this is our closest contact with the Revolution. Well, with that, I think you've got an idea of what colonial Cotuit was like, but we still have a lot of things to find out about it. And if any of you have any clues about cow fences or the name Cotuit or any other colonial ideas you have, I'd be glad to have your contribution. Thank you.
Does anyone have questions for Jim? A couple of questions?
Yes.
Why were there no cow fences after the period, the colonial period?
Oh, they said it became much more common to use. Well, I don't know that. That's the good. Why not? Maybe they did maintain it. Sure, yeah, because one of the reasons I assumed this was that they used bars on the roads, but you couldn't use a cow fence across a road, so maybe they just put the bars. The bars were rails, wooden rails, and I've not seen any evidence of posts, like Old Post Road or anything like that, any posts on these. So maybe they were used well up into the modern period. I don't know when they stopped using and digging out the cow fences. Some of them are pretty conspicuous, so they must have been dug out fairly recently. Good point. Yes, Marge?
Do you know the boundaries of Cotuit? And what does Cotuit mean?
There's an interesting problem in names. The original name of the Cotuit River was the Cotuit Brook. And all until 150 years ago, everybody called that the Cotuit River. Where you cross the bridge over the Mashpee, that's the Cotuit River. It's now called the Cotuit River. Now, I don't know why it was changed or how it was changed, or anybody clues at all, but Cotuit, I'm told, according to Otis, I think means cold brook, cold stream.
Well, the water came from Cotuit Pond.
Comes from Cotuit Pond, right. And that's always been known as Cotuit Pond. They haven't changed the name of that.
That's why they called it the Cotuit.
Logical enough. Good for you, Francis. That's great. Yes.
Where is that cow fence that you said was as big as this room?
It's up off Old Post Road. I'll be glad to take you, show you. Maybe you've got some clues as to what they actually use it for. I'm guessing, like a lot of this. Okay, I think it's Francis's turn.
There is some coffee. It's so tight in here. What I'm going to ask that we do is let these few chairs here, if we can just put them up front and clear the aisle here, because we do have some slides to show, so if we can rearrange these few chairs right up front here. And if anyone does want to come up and sit on the floor, be my guest. Do it now, and if you want a cup of coffee or something to nibble on while we're getting things set up, you can do that too.
Jim?
This is Rennie, Christy Francis Rennie, commonly known as Hunka.
To the old people.
Yeah, to the old people, that's right. He says not too many people call him Hunka anymore because they're all dead. I guess we both went to a few wakes a few days ago. That's cut out a few of us.
You never leave this world alive.
No. I had the pleasure of talking with Francis, listening to Francis a few days ago, and put it all on tape, just for the record. From that, hopefully we can talk about a few of the things in Cotuit that Hunka knows very well. And I came along a little bit after Hunka, and I'm catching up to him, but in any case, it seems as though when I talked with Hunka, he was in another village, because he knows so many things that I don't know.
I'm 10 years older.
Yeah, more than that. As I say, I'm catching up, but not that quickly. But anyway, Hunka knows a lot of things, and we'll touch on some. And I went downstairs and took some slides of some photos that the Historical Society has down there. And you should all try to, whenever you can, go through these photos, because they're much clearer than my slides, for sure. And but we'll try to show a few of the things that you all are familiar with, and maybe Hunka can tell us more about who did what to whom and where. And
Be careful.
But you want to try a slide? I haven't tried to see if we get any kind of a picture. I'll tell you what comes up. You can't see it. Hunka suffers from a condition in his spine that just has fused his spine. So,
I can't stand it.
yeah, he has trouble.
Stand it. I can walk from here to Hyannis.
Yeah,
I can't stand it.
that's a good trick.
You were near the lights, so I don't want to turn off all the
No,
lights.
don't. And a lot of the things they won't be very clear, but I wanted to start. We talked about some of the old hotels here in town, and one was
Yeah.
one was the Cotuit house, as you perhaps all have heard about. Where was that?
Right across from Carol Gardner's, antique shop.
Oh yeah,
Charlie Reagan lives there now.
I see. Was it a big place? Huh?
Probably had 100 people in. Something.
Yeah.
You're gonna take care of the lights.
I want to be able to see.
Well, I don't think I can reach
What
the.
happened?
We had them off and they're on again.
Yeah, she turned it.
I think it's going to be too dark. Because I'd rather.
That's better.
That's better.
Very good.
That's good.
Now you gotta get it focused though, Jessica.
I think we're going the wrong direction.
Probably doesn't have that.
Yeah.
What is that?
This is a view of the Cotuit house from Ropes' Peak.
Remember when that burned
And
down?
there are a couple of more slides that show a little bit of the building from the other direction. You can flip a couple more. Next one. That's it from the street. Now, whatever happened to that anyway?
What is that?
Well, it was built by a guy named Webb. And then his daughter married Raymond Harlow and he ran it. And then it kind of laid idle, and I think it was an insurance job. It burned down 1924.
Well, did you go to the fire?
Yeah.
I suppose that was, yeah, I suppose everybody did.
The only truck that could put it out came from Falmouth. That was too late.
Whatever happened to that truck?
The fire truck,
Yeah.
they drove it into the bay because the guy was drunk directing them. It took them a day to get it out. I won't bring up the gentleman's name. He's still got relatives.
I see. Was the little fire truck there at that time?
Yeah.
Did that go to the fire?
Yeah. My grandfather called that his chamber pot.
Was Seabury Charles the chief then
Yeah.
during the fire?
And the fire station was down next to Sears' department store.
We've got a couple of pictures of that.
And the building is now on Shell Lane.
Right. Who moved it? Did Hayden move it?
I think so.
Okay, that's the Cotuit house. Now, we've got a couple of slides of the pines here.
That's the pine.
Fine.
And the next one, again, please. There's another
Fine.
view of it. So that was a sizable hotel.
The reason we got municipal water, the Pines was a fire trap, and the only way they could save it was talk the district into having their own water system.
So then,
1936 or where?
Prophet, he was one of the proponents.
He was on the Prudential Committee.
Yeah. I think my father was a backer of that too.
We could have been.
Yeah. Where was that house? This, where was the Pines?
Down on Ocean View.
Yeah. And about,
Just beyond Evergreen.
everybody familiar with that? It's about halfway down from the intersection of Main Street and Ocean View to the Loop. About halfway down, well, not quite, quarter of the way down on the left.
Across from the
Yes. And then a lot of the hotel had a lot of the small captain's houses around
Yeah, the
it.
cottages across the street.
Can you tell me anything about the profit that I don't know?
He didn't want you to bring liquor to the hotel, and if you did, he wouldn't give you any ice. I can't imagine people staying there 3 months and not drinking. The first place to have a liquor license was behind the old Cotuit Inn. There was a building there where they kept the ice before they had refrigerated the ice house.
Yes, sir.
So the real sanctimonious people would sneak through the schoolyard into the ice house because they didn't want anybody to see him. My father was brave. He drove his car right in.
Let's see, the Cotuit Inn was a hotel as well. Here's a picture of that. That is now condominiums on the top of the hill as you go down just beyond School Street. Was that a livery at one time, or
Yeah, it belonged to A.C. Burris.
was the whole hotel a livery?
Well, that was the barn. It was a livery stable.
Oh, I see.
According to my mother, she lived to be 94, and I guess she knew what the hell she was talking about.
If she had a memory half as good as yours, she certainly did.
But she did.
Did she?
And a lot of the stuff I know, she passed down to me.
Oh, I see, sure. Yeah.
And some I picked up because I can remember back to 1920 quite clear.
Yeah.
That's quite a while ago.
The livery, of course, when people came here and stayed in the hotels, they had no transportation,
They stayed all summer.
sure. And they got their transportation by going down to the livery and hiring a...
They rented a horse. They either drove it themselves or they furnished somebody to drive it. And then up behind where Ned Ashley did live, Roland Hollow did the same thing. He had a livery too,
Ned Ashley, where's that?
up on Main Street.
Up on...
Robinson's house today.
Yeah.
Next to the schoolyard.
Up beyond Pearson's.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. Right, almost where you were born.
Well, Roland Hollow built Pearson's house, and then he got rich and moved up and built a new one.
How do you get rich? What comes next, Jeff? Oh, I want to go into the schools a little bit, but...
There is a photograph right there to your right on
Oh.
the table.
Oh, I
The
see,
school.
yeah. I took a picture of the ball, the entrance to the ball field as you see it now. And at one time, when I was a youngster and Hunka too, there was a high school there, the Elizabeth Lowell High School. And we're just about in the front yard of the high school there. We used to go through the schoolyard to get back into the back where the ball field was, where the Twilight League ball field, the Twilight League played. And this is the site of the Elizabeth Lowell High School.
That closed in 1928.
And you just missed that, huh?
Yeah.
So,
You know, we went to Hyannis.
yeah. And you were saying that there was going to be a reunion of your class. Did you get a call for that or something?
Yeah, in September.
Next September this week?
This week.
Oh, yeah. Who, how did that-
65th, and I told them we'd all come in the same car. And they didn't find that too humorous. Which didn't bother me a damn bit.
who called you anyway?
Philip Burris.
Oh, Philip.
He used to run Bradford's Hardware.
Ah, yes.
You know him?
Sure,
You
very
probably play golf with him.
Yeah, I had.
He got money he made in 1940.
I can believe that.
He's a nice man.
Nice guy, he is.
He was president of a class.
And he'd come and get you, I'm sure.
Huh?
He'll come and get you in one car, too. The next,
You do have a photograph of the Elizabeth Lowell in hand of what it looked like.
yeah, it's a pretty plain thing, but it's a good, sizable school. Almost impossible to see from that distance, but it was quite a school. I was impressed by it. And it closed. Whatever happened to the wood that came out of it? Did
When
that
they
go-
built the fire station on High Street, the original fire station that's there now, they used the lumber out of the old school.
They didn't miss a trick.
Keith, ask him how many are alive from his class.
Yeah, how many are alive from your class? What? Let's see, the class would be.
We had 76 people in it.
How many are alive now?
So I would guess maybe 30.
Yeah.
Good traveling.
What was your class? 19 what?
32.
32.
We come from good stock.
That's for sure.
My mother was a Harlow, and her relatives, 9 generations back, come over on the first trip of the Mayflower. That's no big deal. And my grandparents on my father's side came from Scotland. And my grandfather's first job in Cotuit was down at the Perkins place on Old Post Road.
What was that? A estate or something
Yeah.
like that?
And when Perkins died, he went down to Ocean View when they built the Bailey House. And he stayed there till Sears died, and then he went over to Oyster Harbor for DuPont.
Oh, yeah.
One of the poorer DuPonts. He was only worth 14 million.
Was your father a strong Scotsman?
Strong.
Strong? Was he physically strong?
He'd pick up a barrel of oysters without rolling it up a barrel and put it in the back of a truck.
And a barrel of oysters probably is about a pound, I would imagine.
Well,
100 pounds?
Between 300 and
Yeah.
400. He said he didn't have time to roll them up.
And that reminds me, you were telling me that we talked about the Twilight Leagues here in Cotuit, the Twilight Baseball League that, you know, there was Cotuit and Osterville and Sandwich, I think, and Sagamore, Falmouth,
And Mashpee.
and Mashpee. And
These guys all worked a day's work. They weren't college kids. They were just people like you and I. And they worked all day and played ball before they ate supper. One guy from Marston's Mill played third base, and in between innings, he'd run over to the car and take a hell of a belt of wine. So by the time the game was over, he didn't know which team he was playing.
did your father ever break up any fights?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He and my mother always parked in a 34 Buick behind third base. Two guys on the same team got fighting on third base, and my father was between 55 and 60. Got out of the car and picked one in each hand, lifted them off the ground, bounced their heads together, and he said, "I come over to watch a ball game." My father went to Tabor Academy, which was, most kids didn't growing up in Cotuit, but my grandfather sprung for it. Because he got thrown out of grammar school because he defended Little River. If you came from Little River, you were nothing. So the girls would go say to my father, "They're teasing me again," the old man. Flatten them right in the ground. And the principal didn't dare grab him because he'd have flattened him. So my grandfather sent him to Tabor. He was captain of the football team, captain of the hockey team, captain of the baseball team. The only reason he didn't play basketball, he was too short. But he had an arm on him like a blacksmith. As you can see, I didn't get it.
Well, tell me, let's shift gears here to maybe another school. And this is a school, the first school that, not the first one. The first one, I was going to say the first one on School Street that I can remember, that I have been able to find pictures of. Maybe there was one that preceded this.
Can I just clear something up? The labeling up top is for a photograph up above that you don't see. So this is the Santuit School, or the one right up here on School
Was that the
Street.
green school in
No,
high ground?
No,
The next, I've got a picture of that coming up.
Yeah.
So the next slide, please, Jesse. That's the same school with the second story on it. And there are a few trees now
I went
that,
first.
Jan,
First and second grade.
Jan Sear's house, Jan Rapp Sear's house is right behind the trees.
Oh,
The slide before it, there were no trees. And then the next slide, please. That's kind of out of focus, but that was the big school, grammar school where I went to grammar.
that's the one I went.
And you went there too.
Is it on the same location?
Same location,
School
right up here where the post office is. And the next slide,
Except it was up against the fence.
the next slide is the post office, the same place.
Same yard.
Same yard.
Now, there was a date on there, was that right, 1894?
On
A few previous slides.
1894, when it was built.
I don't know.
Which one?
There it is.
That one? I think probably.
Yeah, it could have been. Now, my father went to school in High Ground, what they call the greenhouse.
Now, see if, Jesse, the next slide, I think will show the next one. Next, please.
Yes, that is it.
Here's the green school that was in High Ground.
Yeah,
That's the one you were. Now, where in High Ground was this?
on Main Street.
On Main Street, on the right-hand side?
As you come up from around the loop,
Yeah.
it would be about 4 houses on the left. It's been changed, the appearance. My mother went to school in this building way on the back. A one-room schoolhouse in this building.
This
All
is
right,
where
well,
the
now,
Kopi's house, right across from C Street and Main Street, the Kopi house. There's a porch all around front.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of those.
okay, next one. Now, I'd like to have Francis tell us a little bit about downtown. And this happens to be a picture, you'll recognize it a little bit. On the left, the first building is, I think, the Kettle Hall. And that's a double building.
Charlie Fred's Barber Shop was
Yeah.
this side of it.
And the next one was a small little place that is no,
That was Charlie Howell's meat market.
right. And now that's the,
Sears department store on the left, way down.
way down, straight ahead is the Sears.
That's where the Cotuit grocery started. That burned up.
Right on down there.
Yeah, and there was a Jew tailor in there named Holtzman. And a Frenchman named Frank McCure that sat by the building when he was drunk. And it burned up in 1923.
God, did you go to that one too?
Yeah. Wasn't there much else to do?
Yeah. I know as a kid, we always used to kind of wait to have the fire whistle blow
Yeah.
during the summer because it would be something to do. We'd go like hell. I remember when I went to one.
Everybody in the
ended up
village
being
would
home.
show up.
Huh?
Everybody in the village would show up.
That's right. I went to one and it was at my own house.
Only one?
Yeah, well, they had a few.
They used to ring the church bell before they had a siren. And now the status symbol of Cotuit doesn't want to horn on the fire. EPA doesn't like it.
Was that where the street light was?
That
corner?
the street light, the traffic light,
Yeah.
we've got a picture of that. We'll show that to you.
At the
It's
foot
right
of the
around
street.
corner from
He's
that.
got a great
The foot of
story
the
about
street.
that.
Yes, foot of the
That's
street.
School Street.
Yeah. The next one, Jess.
That came in 1825.
This is School Street. This is looking up School Street. And what are the ones on the left now?
That was Seth Handy's variety store, which is now
The gas station.
Procopio.
Yeah. So what Seth Handy's what?
Kind of a variety store. He sold cars,
Yeah.
this and that.
How about the next one? Remember?
Herb Long store.
No. Oh, yeah, Herb was on that side. Yeah.
And
For a while.
there was NAMP in that one.
Yeah, he was on that side. And then he moved over to the corner.
Right.
Okay.
And he had a Pioneer store over there.
Pioneers.
Mainly grocery
Now, next one, just now here's the big store that's no longer there.
By the Packers,
That's where the park is.
right on the corner of School and Main.
And what was in there?
Anything you want, shoes, rubber boots,
Fire
suit,
station next to it.
women's clothes, men's clothes. And the guy that built it lived up where Charlie Brooks did.
Oh, right up on corner of Coolidge Street there,
Yeah.
Maine.
His name was Ben Sears, nothing to do with Sears Roebuck.
So that was then the Sears department store.
And after that, they split it up, as you remember, in little stores.
Right.
Manny the Barber, Isaacson's
Yeah.
Clothing,
Post office.
and Long had a store on the end of it.
And
And post office.
and finally the post office. Yeah.
Yeah, and the post office was there. Myrtle, she was a deal. I got my GI insurance when I come out.
Yeah.
And I went in one day, and she says, well, you didn't write down the right number. And I told her what she could do with that insurance, and I canceled it. She was a Savory. They always had their own way.
Well, not too many savories here.
I don't care for it.
I remember working in a grocery store right on the corner when I was a kid. And upstairs there was a men's
Men's club.
club. Who belonged to that? It never
My
struck
father did, Fred Harlow did, the selectman did, Chester Crocker, John Shields. They were known to play poker up there after.
me. Oh, I see.
What happened to the Sears store?
The one across the way?
Did it burn or get torn down?
They just took it down.
This one we just
That was
had
a
to
rat
take it
trap.
out.
How recent?
Fire hazard.
There were 3 people in Cotuit donated $7,000 apiece because they said it was an eyesore, and they tore it down. They gave the land to the park.
Yeah, the land was traded, and so it could become a bigger park. Somehow the trade was made so the land where the post office now is, that went to the church. The church gave the town the land, and the land that belonged to the church was this land that was given to the church by these 3 people that you. So in other words, the 3 people bought the land, gave it to the church. The church took that land, gave it to the town to enlarge the park, and the town gave the church the school land. So it was a swap.
And between this building and the library were 2 houses
That's right.
and a pile of sand.
Yeah. And the firehouse is to the right.
Yeah, you can just see the corner of it.
Yeah.
So that's how the post office property belongs to the church.
Church. Now that's the little firehouse.
That was right beside that.
Yeah, right beside the bigger building there.
And that's the palace.
It looks as though there's some kind of a garage or something right there, barn or something.
We had an old timer in town. He says every time the siren blew, the people ran in, hung their brains on a hook, and put the hats on. He might have been right.
We all have memories of old fires around here, some of which are funny. Some I can't tell, too.
There were several in the Rapp estate. Because his brother liked to experiment. And it didn't always work out. So every time you looked on the board and it said School Street, you stopped at Rapp's with a fireplace.
And we had 4 in our house. Yeah. And I'm surprised it's still standing. One was an ironing board fire. And have you ever seen an ironing board that's just got a hole in it the shape of an iron? Well, we had it just my mother let the iron just stay there, plugged in, it just burned a hole right through. And I think it set on something else on fire. But anyway, the next slide will show what happened to the schoolhouse. I mean the firehouse. This is to the right is the firehouse that was made out of the Elizabeth Lowell School on the same site where the firehouse is now. And that being moved off the site is the old firehouse. And that's Hayden moving it, I guess. And where did that go? Down at Shell Lane, did you say?
Shell Lane, Arnold Lundquist there. Remember him? He worked at Gibbs.
Yeah, I do.
Well,
I think
Crawford
Bob
bought it.
Hayden still
He
owns
worked
that
for
truck.
Crawford then.
I think so too, Jim.
Crawford bought it?
Yeah, and let Arnold live in it.
Oh, yeah.
So it came first from down on the corner of Main and School, moved up to High Street, and now it's gone from High
That's-
School Street to
yeah.
Shelley.
Right. Next, this is, from what I can gather, is the house, is the store right at the foot of School Street. You drive down School Street, you drive right into that. The next one, there's a barber, obviously a barber there. That's the site I'm talking about. Right down School Street, and you drive where the stop sign is, that was where the store. When I came here in 1920, there was a hole,
Nothing but the basement.
Yeah.
just a basement. Yeah. And this building here was, that was Bridges, wasn't it?
Bridges, ice cream parlor.
Because when it burned up, we saved the basement.
Fire truck again.
Next slide, please. Then they remodeled it into that thing.
Right.
Yeah.
It went from
From
this,
that
yeah.
With that.
to that.
Oh, wow.
And that was the first coupe, right? Let's see. Who started that?
3 men, that's why they called it the Coop. It was a cooperative. Milton Crocker's brother-in-law, Fred Parker, who never smiled at anybody, and Howard Dottridge lived up near my mother. And Lizzie, his wife, when he come home with a load on, would have to get a lantern and go out and look for him. And another man from High Ground, that I don't know. So they kept it, and Mr. Crocker eventually bought them all out.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was after, then this thing burned out.
And they moved up where they are now.
Then so the coupe moved up where the coupe is now.
And that was a hardware store belonged to Julius Nickerson. And they rented an apartment upstairs.
Julius, tell me that you recounted something about Julius Linnell.
Yeah, he sat down to supper, and well, he never would have been president, but he might have been a hell of an improvement on what we've had. He ate his meal, and everybody got up, and we called it supper, now it's dinner, but who cares? And he sat and sat and sat, and finally his brother's wife said, Julius, why don't you eat your dessert? He says, I ain't got no spoon. And he sat there half an hour, never asked for a spoon.
Well, Julius was that type. He used to walk, he lived the other side of us up on Highland Avenue. And he'd walk by us, our house on School Street, coming downtown in the morning, and he had a corncob pipe, and he just sort of walked directly. He didn't look any direction. And he'd come down the street, he'd stay there until, that's right, the whistle blew. And he'd walk back up, and he'd go back and have lunch. Then about an hour later, I guess, he'd walk back again. And then he'd be down there all afternoon. And then, I guess after the meal or something, he'd walk back. I mean, you could set your clock by it. He used to go down to the wharf when we used to swim there. And he'd toss over pennies, and we'd dive and get them. I don't know how to get the pennies.
They said he fondled little girls, but I never caught him.
Oh, I didn't hear that one. Okay, what's the next one, Jess?
Oh, there's
Yeah.
street light?
This is the traffic light.
Traffic light.
Main Street, looking down from Cotuit Inn, the top, the hill, looking down toward the park. School Street goes up that way, and there's the traffic light. I never saw that.
Ask him what happened to it.
29. It was there in 1929. They kept it here because after dark everybody went through it anyway. Now that's Foster coming up the hill.
That's right. You,
Who is Foster?
You can explain.
Oh,
well, I'll explain a little bit. Foster was, I guess he had cerebral palsy, and as a result he was quite spastic. He could move around, and he walked around, kept chickens, sold lottery tickets when they weren't legal, and whatever else.
Christmas cards.
Yeah, green cards. And he couldn't speak very well.
You had to grow up with him to be able to talk to him, actually.
All the kids could understand him. I could understand him, and it's just because we were around him a lot, and we'd help. Whenever he got on the hill, if we were around, we'd push him up to the top of the hill and let him. He lived down high ground, and
Was it motorized? Was it motorized?
didn't he have motorized hotels?
Later on.
Mabel Riley bought him a motorized one. Could be something like a golf cart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what happened? Did he have that a long time? Or?
I don't think he wrecked it.
She bought him two, Francis.
He done.
Huh?
She bought him two of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She-
They were both down in the house for a long time, but they're gone now.
Oh, yeah.
And Dr. Rapp, why was it called the high ground? That end of town.
I'd leave that to Dr. Gould.
Well, when you leave School Street, you go up a hill.
But then you go down a big one.
It can't be as simple as that, I don't think.
I always call it the low
But
ground.
after you get to the road that goes to Ocean View,
Right.
all the houses sit on a hill.
Oh, okay.
For, for a little bit.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's why they call it high ground.
maybe.
And also, some of the early Nickersons had fishing shacks down near Fuller's Marsh, Rushy Marsh.
Uh-huh.
And during some early hurricanes, they lost a lot of them, so they moved what they called up to high ground.
Up to high ground.
Right.
To a little bit drier land.
Okay.
Now that makes a little sense. Yeah. Well, there are a couple other people in Cotuit. I don't have any pictures of, but tell us about. There was one blind.
Chester.
Chester was it blind Chester? Yeah.
Blind
Yeah.
Yeah.
He, as I understand, lived down in high ground.
He lived on Shell Lane.
Yeah. And
The house is still there.
And
He went cohogging.
what call?
He walked down the shore, and all he wanted to know was what time of day. Well, he knew roughly because he had a watch that he could tell time. But he had to know which way the wind was blowing and how the tide was. He'd get in his scow and go out and cohog a clam and then come back ashore and go home.
And here he was blind as that, I guess.
And he walked from his house to Santuit. And he knew every home that had a picket fence. And he had a walking stick. And he'd run that stick along the picket fence till he come to a gap where there was no fence. Then he'd walk till he hit another fence and he knew where he was again.
When did he go blind, Francis?
Well, he was blind from the time I was a kid.
Yeah. There was another interesting fellow was leading up to a story that I'll tell, but and that's Charlie Fred, the
barber. Your daughter lives in his house.
That's right. Yes. And his barber shop was right in the same building where the Kettle Hole is now.
They were that far apart.
Yeah. And the story was he would cut your hair, but he had a terrible tremor.
But the minute he put the scissors on the back of your neck, he stopped shaking.
And
He
he
nipped
would
my
shave.
ear once.
Huh?
He nipped my ear once.
Did he? So he didn't always. But he used to shave people too. And he had a terrible tremor. I mean, it really was awful. And he'd come up.
We walked around that chair for so many years, there was a little gutter. There was, in the wooden floor. But speaking about the barber shop, there was a man in there one day bragging how he took care of his family. He had 5 kids. His father-in-law come in. Everybody congregated in the barber shop when it was raining, you couldn't work. And his father-in-law looked at him, he says, "You take care of those 2 you got in Falmouth?" I won't mention any family.
Tell us a little bit about the traffic coming into town. You remember when Route 28 wasn't Route 28?
I'd come into Cotuit until 1931. You come down from Ashby Rotary, you had to turn and come to Cotuit. There was no road from there to Santur. And you came through Cotuit and took a right up here, went down to Marston's Mills, down the hill. You had to go through Marston's Mills, back across, which is now 28, into Osterville, into Centerville, and into West Hyannis. From Falmouth, it was a good hour in the old days. And going to Boston in the old days was 3 hours and a half.
Well, the story I was going to tell, the 3 people that we mentioned, that's Blind Chet with his tremor, and the barber, Charlie Fred, the barber, Blind Chet, and Foster. And the story goes, Richard Ryder used to tell this, and he was super. Oh God! He told it a dozen times to me, and it would kill me. But anyway, I'll relate it because it's, I don't know whether it's true, but it sounds true. This lady, proper lady, drove in with her chauffeur to Cotuit, I guess probably from Monument Beach or someplace, looking for the Pines. Came down School Street, and there were some people on School Street, as they're off to work, and men and whatever kids around. So she pulled up in front of Charlie Fred's barber shop. And Charlie Fred was out there, but he's deaf as a post. There's nothing that comes through. And so she asked him, "Please, sir, could you direct us to the Pines?" And of course he didn't say a damn word. He didn't hear anything, so he couldn't say anything. And so, well, I guess I'm not going to get any answer there. So she drove a little further, and she came to a fellow standing there. He was smoking, and she said, "Please, sir, could you direct us to the Pine Hotel?" Well, this was Blind Chet. And he said, "Well, which way are you headed?" So, the third person, here's a young fellow, in his cot right by the. So she pulled up and looked at him and asked him, well, Foster, he could not give directions or anything else without, how some people are. And with that, she said, "Oh, well, let's get out of here."
Years ago, people had what they called touring cars. My father had a Chrysler. He had the third Chrysler on Cape Cod. Cost him $800, and they delivered it. You didn't have to go look at it. So people came down from Boston, and every Sunday you went for a ride in your car. So this guy come down from Boston in a touring car, and when there was nobody home, he picked their flowers, he picked their blueberries, he picked their strawberries, he picked their raspberries, he dug a bush out of somebody's yard. On the way home, he got lost, and he said to a guy standing on the side of the road, "Can I take this road back to Boston?" He said, "Christ, you might as well, you got everything else."
concludes my part of this, and I'm sure Francis would be happy to answer any of your questions.
Lights, please.
I didn't want to wear a hat. My brains work better with my hat.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the
Good sense of
background and
humor.
role of Elizabeth
Very good.
Now, I want you to know that I am not a historian, and Francis, I'm sure, would be
What do you
happy.
wanna know?
He wants to know something about the Elizabeth Lowell School, or Elizabeth Lowell people, or Elizabeth Lowell. The Lowell.
She was Lawrence Lowell's wife and lived across,
On the point here?
they owned all the land from there to Robeson.
Yeah.
And he was president of Harvard. And that was either his wife or his mother, I'm not sure. It could have been his mother,
Well, why did they name the school that?
because they owned all the land from there to Marston's Mill. Pretty much.
They probably gave him the land, or
Yeah,
something?
yeah, they do.
Yes.
I just want to get a sense from the names that you were using, what the ethnic makeup to it has been over the years. If there's ever been, other than the Jewish tailor, much of a diversity here.
Most everybody, the Nickersons and Savorys were English.
I guess so. Jews.
Jews. I don't think so.
Plenty of good Scots.
I don't know.
Plenty of good Scotsmen.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about fishermen? Portuguese.
Portuguese. That's
Yeah.
a lot of.
Newtown Road was about the only ethnic group in town.
That's right.
Was strictly Portuguese.
Yeah.
They made pretty good moonshine and good wine. I never drank their moonshine. It was only $1 a pint. And some of those old timers made a fortune selling that at $1 a pint.
Is that right? I didn't know they did that up
You do.
there. They did that right up on Newtown Road?
Oh, yeah. And one guy had 8 children. They all went to work, and maybe the youngest one made $15 a week, and the rest of them made 18 and 20, which was big money in the 20s. You got paid cash Saturday night. You brought it home and set it on the table. And the patriarch took the whole bit and gave me each a half a buck.
That sounds like my grandmother.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Rennie, I want to thank you very much for sharing your stories,
I'm delighted.
and the society is very grateful for you lending yourself.
This may be my last hurrah.
Our old-timer evenings have been such a success, never this successful. And I appreciate everyone cramming themselves into here. I guess maybe our next one will have to be at Freedom Hall. And I know there's a few old-timers sitting in the audience here, too. So if you're interested at all in sharing some stories in the future with us, we'd be more than happy to listen to you. The Society has in the past taken oral history interviews, and we have them on tape, and we have transcribed them, and some of those excerpts from the oral histories we have published in the newsletter. But if you want to read some more about it, they are available at the Society, and you can come down and look at them. So I guess that's it. Thank you
You
all.
want me to tell them the story about the cow?
Yeah.
They're all adults. Everybody here adults?
This might be X-rated, so.
Shall I tell it?
Now.
This man from Santuit,
This is a true story, I understand.
he had a cow and it needed to be serviced. So the man come up from Master's Mills to take with his bull to take care of all the cows in the neighborhood. So this guy was lazy, so he went up to Mashpee and hired a guy to hold the cow while the bull went through his section. Well, the bull missed a target, and the fellow holding the cow says, "I like veal, but not that young." That's supposed to be a true story.
Oh, yeah. You haven't been over to take any pictures lately?
No, but did you get one of your